Last week, whilst talking about Remember Your Place being one of the clear themes that runs through Bridgerton season 4, particularly across its main story and its subplots to make it quite the coherent season that we've gotten in a while. I am still looking at the mess they made of season 3, by the way. I mentioned in passing about how that theme plays with the character of Araminta Gun, who indeed is insistent on Sophie remembering a place, but who also, as a character, had to deal with that herself upon her marriage. And I made a note to myself to go fully in depth into talking about her because I did notice one or two comments that jumped out whereby people argued that Araminta was still villainous in her machinations, reasons withstanding. Which, yes, I do agree that Araminta Gun was an absolute nightmare to Sophie Bake. However, I believe quite staunchly, actually, that whilst her actions might read villainous, the true villain of Bridgerton season 4, as it pertains to Sophie's story, is actually her father, the Earl of Penwood, Lord Gun himself. And I want to explain why. So, if you would please grant me the courtesy and privilege of having some of your time and attention, I would like to do just that. Of course, before I get into all of that, I would, as always, like to say a big thank you to my lovely Patreon and YouTube members whose support have been instrumental in helping me continue to make content, especially since I started doing this full time at the start of last year, which was the last time I was in paid employment. And a special shout out to Lena, Sherry, and Holly for their extra support. You get all the hearts and kisses to mwah. If you too would like to support me on Patreon or become a YouTube member to enjoy certain perks, even get a shout out, the link to do so is in the description bar. And with that said, let us come back around to the character of Araminta Gun, who I find fascinating in as much as I want to reach into the screen and shake her hard. Because here is the thing, as frustrating as she is, I understand her to an extent because not unlike Portia Featherington, Araminta Gun is also a woman who has been jaded by their society and what it expects of her. But whilst Portia is someone who I ultimately respect because say what you will, she does love and will do anything and everything for her daughters. Araminta is a bit more selective about which of her daughters that care applies to, and that is something I can't necessarily forgive because Posie is a delight. However, I can suspect why she is the way she is with Posie. It's as much as why Portia is in the earlier seasons she did not extend the same care she gave Prudence and Philippa to Penelope. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I will come back to Araminta and Posie in a bit. Now, like I said in last week's video, to fully understand the context behind Araminta's treatment of Sophie, we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Lord Gun, the Earl of Penwood, Sophie's father and Araminta's second husband. The key word here being second husband. Now, remember, all of this is happening during Regency times, a wholly patriarchal society where a woman's worth is tied either to the husband she marries or the son she births. Her control ceded to either because that is what is expected and demanded of her. Now, consider the character of Araminta Gun, recently widowed with two daughters and no sons to tie her to her first husband or elevate her status. One could deduce that her options were running low because society as it is, even in present day, is not kind to widows, talk less of Regency England. And then you have Lord Gun, a man who, just like a lot of the other men of his time, had a mistress, one who he had promised to care for as all the lords do. But her position in his life as a mistress already limits who she can be and the ranks to which the child she bore him can rise to. But that is by the by. His mistress is dead, leaving him with a daughter that he takes into his home as his ward. Now, before anybody's about to say, well, at least he did the decent thing in taking Sophie in, I will like to point out that that is the barest minimum as he is her father. She is his ward. And considering his circles, there would have been rumors that he did have a mistress. Anthony didn't bother hiding it with Sienna. And we know that Benedict's colleague did bring his mistress out in the circles that they were in, but never brought her into polite society because mistress, duh. Anyway, as I was saying, you have Lord Gun, the Earl of Penwood, with a word that anybody would immediately put the pieces together as her being his illegitimate child, now in search of a wife. The person with power in that scenario is the titled lord. And I do not think it's a coincidence that he chose a widow to marry. Matter of fact, I consider it the calculating, conscientious choice because, unlike a titled daughter of an esteemed family, which would have been more fitting for his position as an earl, and please don't tell me it's a matter of his age. Like, let's be real, the Cowpers were planning on marrying Cressida to a septuagenarian, and let's not forget Deres Marina either. So he could have had his choice of a titled young lady. He chose a widow instead because he and she would be very well aware that her options are more limited than his, with no son to care for her and her two girls that she has to raise within society so that they can hopefully make a good match. She needs Lord Gunn and what he can provide, and he knows it too. It is why, in that moment when he's introducing her to his staff, purposefully skips over Sophie, and Araminta goes back to speak with the girl, after which Lord Gunn confirms her parentage. We see Araminta look back with clear hurt in her eyes. She is stuck, she is trapped, she is powerless. And he knows it too. It is why he never mentioned that he had a ward living with him before they married. He kept that information hidden on purpose until Araminta was stuck with no way out and had to bear it as the new Countess of Penwood. That, my dearest viewers, is why she ended up reacting the way she did to Sophie, why she resented her so much. Because let's be real, Araminta was courteous, kind, and gentle when she first met Sophie. When she saw this young, lovely little girl, you could see the kindness and care in her. In that brief moment of ignorance, when Sophie was just another girl and Araminta was the newly introduced lady of the estate, things changed for her when she realized the truth that her husband had hid from her, the trap that had been set. And I know it doesn't excuse her behavior, but it's a pretty human thing. A human reaction to want to lash out through the only way in which you have some power and control when you yourself have been stripped of all of that. It is why I believe that the fucking Earl of Penwood is the villain of this story. Whether it's the fact that he overstepped his place and took a maid as his mistress, very much aware of what that would mean for said maid. The fact that it would irrevocably bind her to him, because who will ever employ a maid who's been a mistress? Remember Mrs. Crabtree's concern about Sophie and Benedict's clear interest in her. She knows their society is unkind to maids who catch the eyes of nobility. And yet Lord Gunn does it anyway. She bears a daughter for him. She passes on. He brings their daughter into his home, remarries, hides the truth of the situation from the woman he's chosen, and saddles her with his daughter with the expectations that she would treat Sophie right. And when she doesn't, he cannot, in good conscience, call her to order, because buried in there is his guilt and the knowledge that he did trick Araminta into the situation with him. Plus, she's the countess and Sophie is but his ward. Then there is the fact that even with all of that, Araminta has zero security, because try as she might, she doesn't bear a son for Lord Gunn. Hell, she doesn't even bear him a daughter either. She has no children for him up until he dies, which means they have no union together that would secure her place. And the only offspring of the now dead Earl of Penwood is Sophie. Is it therefore a reach to consider that Araminta in that moment was acting out of self preservation, especially considering the times? And then there's the bit with Posie, which, like I stated at the start of this video, infuriated me to no end, because I love Posie. I love her relationship with Sophie. They are sisters in the truest of ways that can't be compared to the mess that is Posie's relationship with Rosamond. And so I will state outrightly that I am biased and thus resent Araminta's treatment of Posie. However, just as I highlighted with Portia, I do think part of why Araminta acts the way she does as it pertains to her youngest daughter is that she doesn't really understand her. Posie is not like any of the other young ladies in the town. She doesn't behave as is expected of her. She has so many interests, goes off tangents. It's clearly autistic. And Araminta doesn't know what to do with the girl. And so she berates her. It's a tough love meets dismissive parenting style that irks me to no end. But I also understand where it is coming from, even though I cannot tolerate it, because Posie deserves the world. And so does Sophie too. Just in case someone is about to leave a comment about me not liking Sophie, because Sophie is a fucking goddess. But anyway, as I was saying, Araminta's clear favoritism as it pertains to her daughters is born out of her inability to understand Posie and to appreciate her for who she is, because she doesn't quite have the bearings or elegance of a young lady. And she's most likely despaired of over trying to get Posie to be like the other women of the turn. And so instead turned all her attention on Rosamond, who becomes just as much of a shock as her mother. Although I will like to point out that Rosamond makes me want to scream, but at the same time, I do extend her character some grace as well, because if you're raised into a spoiled brat by Araminta, the odds really are stacked against you being a decent person. And before anybody wants to draw comparisons between Posie and Eloise, I will point out that Violet is just as fed up with her second daughter. The only difference is that the Bridgerton household really is filled with love and care. Plus, let us not forget that Violet did check out for quite a while after Edmund's death, and Eloise kind of did raise herself, which adds a lot to her independent streak as well. So, food for thought on that. Now, this part of the video, we address events from the end of An Offer from a Gentleman. So, if you are a show only and do not want to be spoiled for a pretty significant reveal that we get in the latter end of the book, which you will get to see when season 4B drops on the 26th, then this is the point where I will say thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button if you haven't done so yet, and enjoy the video. And with that said, for book readers who are about to write an epistle about how, well, you see, it wasn't really the Earl's fault. After all, we get confirmation in the jail scene that he actually did leave Sophie a dowry, as Posie confirms after she snooped in her mother's things. The fault is all Araminta's, truly, since she's the one who took Sophie's dowry, hid it from her, and spent the money. And to that, I will say yes. Once again, I am not disputing that quite the number of Araminta's choices and her behavior in this story is absolutely appalling. However, I think that that defense makes things even so much worse for the Earl, because based off of the addition that was done in the show, we know that the Earl was very much aware of how displeased his countess was with the daughter he had with his mistress. He got confirmation outrightly that Araminta was shunning Sophie and didn't let her take dance lessons with Rosamond and Posie. At this point, you have to be as blind as a fucking bat or be willfully obtuse to believe for a moment that your wife, who clearly doesn't like your daughter and barely tolerates her, is the best person for you to leave said daughter's inheritance with. Like, let us be honest with ourselves here. It yet again reiterates Lord Gunn's utterly lackadaisical approach to life, that he did not choose to have this stated and handled by a fucking lawyer. And before you say maybe he didn't know, once again, the evidence confirms it. If Penelope Featherington, a woman at the time, can contract her own lawyer to handle her affairs and her finances, you're trying to tell me that a bloody Earl didn't think to have a contingency, a second person who is aware and can execute the will of his estate upon his death? Like, no. What happened instead confirms what we should be well aware of. The Earl of Penwood is someone who is quick to give assurances and promises, which is all well and good, but it doesn't take the effort to follow through on them. That has always been the problem, and it is what Araminta confirms and tells Sophie in the cemetery when they are laying him to rest. His relationship with Sophie and her mother has always been about promises not kept, and if the show does follow things to the letter with regards how the situation was resolved at the end, Benedict doesn't even accept Sophie's dowry. Like, yes, we know he loves her and doesn't need it, but ultimately, even for Sophie's eventual happiness, her father still doesn't play a role other than being a sperm donor. I repeat, because I know no one has gone to die in the world, but I do hope that my point is coming across clearly. This isn't me saying that Araminta did no wrong. My point has always been that Lord Gunn's refusal to take an active role in the life of the child that he had promised his mistress he was going to care for is just as much to blame in the situation that Sophie has to deal with. And that includes the almost sexual assault that she would have suffered, mind you, if Benedict had not come riding in with his good manners, her knight in shiny armor, until he asked her to be his mistress, of course. Benedict. Also, I will never, never forgive Lord Gunn for insisting that Sophie never call him father. Like, fuck that man for real. And for book readers who might be confused about when that happened, please go reread the part just before Sophie is accused of theft by Araminta and arrested. Before that moment occurred, she had obstinately chosen to call him father to herself, even though she remembered that he forbade her from doing so. He might have loved her by virtue of his love for her mother, his mistress, yes, but he was also negligent in a lot of ways. And if you talk to children who have suffered childhood neglect at the hands of their parents, specifically fathers who should have protected them better, then you know that his actions hurt just as much. But of course, these are just my thoughts. I would, as always, love to hear yours. Whether or not you agree with me, please share them in the comments. Like this video, however, if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet, but enjoyed anything of what I had to say, share it so others can find my channel as well. Or you can check out my gaming or ASMR channels if they sound like something you might be interested in. I have them both linked in the description. I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.